Frozen fingers clutched two wool-wrapped bundles. Ella's breath plumes white against the blinding snow, each gust a knife against her cracked lips. "Almost there," she whispers, though the lie chills her more than the wind. She carries a secret. The cavalry's coming, and they won't distinguish between settler and savage. Her boots sank with every step, her arms wrapped tight around two wool-swaddled bundles trembled beneath her coat. The babies pressed to her chest stirred now and then, too weak to cry. One of them let out a whimper. She tightened the coat, pulling it closed with cracked hands almost there. She whispered, though she no longer knew where there was. The chimney had gone cold. The woodpile was buried beneath 5 feet of snow. The wind had pushed it clear over the ridge and drifted it against the door. The stove hissed once, then went silent. Ella crouched beside it, two newborns swaddled and sleeping on a wool blanket near the hearth. She pressed her palm to the iron plate. Cold, already cold. She stood slowly, looked to the small bundled shapes on the blanket, then to the last splinter of kindling in the box. Not enough, not nearly enough. The walls creaked with every gust. The roof above her had begun to sag. The door hung half open. Snow curling in the storm had claimed the cabin even before she left it. Ella Langley knew if she stayed, they wouldn't make it through the night out, back beneath a mound of stone she'd stacked with frozen fingers. Lay Luke's body, there hadn't been time for prayer. The blizzard didn't allow for that kind of softness. But before he died, he'd held her hand and pressed something small into her palm. A carved disc of wood initials, LW, burned into its face when you can't see the path. Luke, it whispered, carry something that remembers you. She carried it now. She rubbed it in her pocket like a rosary. The grooves worn smooth beneath her thumb, so she pulled on her coat, tucked the twins to her chest, and walked to the door. The hinges shrieked, the wind screamed back, and Ella Langley stepped into the storm. "I'm trying, Luke," she whispered, her voice brittle as frost. "I'm trying." A sudden gust knocked her to her knees. She hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the weight of her fall. Snow flooded up her sleeves, her arms curled instinctively around the twins. They didn't cry. The cold had become something inside her. Now no longer a threat, just a presence. She lowered her forehead. "To the snow, please." She said, not to God exactly, just to the sky, to the wind, to anything that might still be listening. And then a figure moved in the storm. She blinked, certain it was her mind slipping. The shape was too tall, too steady to be real, but it didn't vanish. The man stepped out of the snow like he'd been carved from it, wrapped in thick furs. Bow slung across his shoulder, black hair trailing in the wind. He crouched beside her, spoke something low and soft, a language she didn't know. Ella tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't part. He reached forward, hesitated for a heartbeat, then gathered the babies into his arms. She saw his eyes, dark, steady, utterly calm. And then everything went black. Warmth stirred her back to awareness. It pressed gently against her cheeks, fur against skin. The low crackle of fire, the scent of smoke and wet leather. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking up at a sloped ceiling of stitched hide and bone poles. The inside of a tipi dimly lit by filtered morning light. Her body ached, every joint buzzed with the dull throb of life returning. She tried to move, but her ribs flared with pain. A sharp breath caught in her throat across the fire. A woman stirred, gray at the temple's expression. Calm hands worn from work, she stood without speaking and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside Ella with a bowl of steaming broth. Ella's lips parted, but her voice failed. The woman, rising fawn, offered the bowl with quiet insistence. When Ella's hand shook, she helped her lift it. The broth was salty, smoky, and thin, but it tasted like something she had nearly forgotten: survival. Then the woman moved to the cradle. Ella turned sharply, heart leaping into her throat, but there, swaddled and sleeping, were Noah and Lily. Their cheeks pink, their breath visible in little puffs of warmth. Alive, a sob escaped her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, rising. Fawn said something in her own tongue. Low and even, not a question. Not a command, just presence. Later, the door flap shifted. A figure appeared in the entrance. Tall and shadowed against the snow-lit air, wrapped in winter hides, shoulders broad, bow slung across his back. He stepped inside. Ella didn't move, but her eyes followed him. He crouched near the cradle, reached out, then paused. His hand hovered just above Noah's tiny chest. His fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. He didn't touch the child. Ella watched the stillness in him. How someone so sure on the ridgeline could seem so unsure here. After a moment, he tapped his chest. Talon, she blinked Ella. She rasped her throat raw. He nodded once. Ella, then he stood and walked back out into the cold. She lay back, heart still racing. Her hand rested on the edge of the cradle. The baby stirred, and outside a hawk cried out into the bright, bitter sky. The storm had passed, but its breath still lingered in the soil. By the third day, Ella could rise without help. By the fourth, she walked with slow steps between teepees, her coat now stitched at the sleeves, a wool wrap tied around her waist. She moved carefully, always within reach of the cradle where Noah and Lily lay, swaddled the camp. Made no ceremony of her presence. No one stared. No one welcomed her. But space was made by the fire beside the water barrels near the racks of drying meat. It was enough. Rising Fawn offered no lessons, but Ella learned anyway how to turn dried berries into thick paste, how to stack cedar branches for warmth, how to read meaning in the smoke that rose from cooking fires. Most of all, she learned to watch, and she watched Talon. He came and went without warning, sometimes alone, sometimes returning with games slung over his shoulder, or a boy limping beside him after a tracking lesson. He never stayed long. But when he passed the cradle, he always paused one afternoon. She found him crouched beside Lily. His face was quiet, carved in stillness, but his hands rested open on his knees. She sat a short distance away, not speaking. Rising Fawn joined her after a long silence. Ella asked what happened to him. The older woman stared into the coals. He had a sister once, younger, fierce like your girl. Ella looked toward the cradle. She went to fetch water during the first thaw. Rising Fawn continued. River was high. She slipped. Talon had gone ahead, thought she was behind him. A long pause passed. They found her after the ice broke. Ella closed her eyes that evening. Noah would not stop crying. His face turned red, fists clenched in the cradle. Ella tried feeding him, then rocking, then humming. He only wailed louder. Talon appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask. He knelt beside them, held out his arms. Ella hesitated, then handed Noah over. Talon didn't sway or bounce. He simply held the child to his chest. Breathing slow after a few minutes, Noah quieted his small cheek pressed against Talon's collarbone. Fists unclenched. Ella stared. That's the first time he's done that since Luke died, she whispered. Talon looked at her. He knows, and for the first time, Ella didn't feel like she was only surviving. She felt seen. The moon rose, clean and white that night, brushing the valley in silver. The snow had crusted into a fragile shell, crackling underfoot as scouts returned to camp one by one. Ella stood just outside her lodge, arms wrapped tight, watching mist curl from the breath of horses tethered nearby inside the twins. Slept curled like pups, cheeks flushed with warmth. Lily snored faintly, then the quiet broke. A scout galloped into camp, his mount streaked with frost and foam. He called out names sharply in Comanche, and the camp stirred at once. Fires stoked elders, summoned warriors drawn to the center. Talon was already moving. Ella stepped back into shadow as he and several others converged on the fire ring. There were maps unrolled, voices low and tight, words she couldn't understand, but she didn't need to. She could read their faces when Talon returned to her. His jaw was set. Cavalry patrols. He said north of the river, drawing maps marking lines. Her eyes narrowed. Do they know about this place? Not yet, but they've claimed 2 camps south of here. Were raiding burned. 1 took 4 prisoners. He paused. 2 were children. Ella stared at the fire. They'll say it's protection. She murmured, they always do. He answered. A coal cracked between them, splitting into sparks. Talon took something from inside his coat, a creased, damp piece of parchment with foreign ink, and a broken seal. They're calling this Land Federal Offering, safe passage to anyone who registers. Tribes that don't will be relocated. He let the paper fall to the fire. The flames caught at once. Ella didn't speak. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached down and pulled the cradle a few inches closer to the fire. They don't get to redraw the map of my life, she said. Talon didn't smile, but he stayed beside her until the flames turned the notice to ash. The snow receded day by day, peeling back into wet grass, and mud sap ran in the cottonwoods, smoke thin from the teepees. The river unfroze, and with the thaw came the first settler wagon. Ella was chopping roots with rising fawn when she saw it. 3 men on horseback and a woman riding in back, slowly approaching from the ridge. Their coats were clean. Their rifles rested too easily. Talon walked out to meet them without a word. Voices rose in the clearing. Some of the camp watched from a distance, others turned their backs. One of the riders dismounted, Reed Thatcher. Ella recognized a dustbin man with a store. In the eyes of someone who remembered what others forgot, he walked toward her without invitation. "Mrs. Langley," he said. She stood straighter. "I thought it might be you," he continued. "Heard stories. A white woman in a Comanche camp with 2 babies and a ghost of a past." She didn't speak. He glanced at the cradle where Noah and Lily lay, bundled. "They're yours?" Ella nodded once. "Mine. And Luke's a second man. Broader and younger," scoffed. "They look half red to me." Talon stepped up beside her. The man kept his eyes on Ella. "You really mean to raise them here? With him?" Ella's voice didn't shake. "They're alive because of him." Thatcher stepped forward, holding out a folded letter from your family back east. "They can't come for you, but they wanted you to know they're praying." She took the paper, didn't open it. The younger man leaned closer. "You think Dustben's gonna accept this? A white woman playing wife to a Comanche raising mongrels?" Ella's knuckles whitened around the cradle rail. "People already talk," the man sneered. "Come planting season, they'll shut your gates before you can buy seed." Just then the settler woman in the back of the wagon spoke. Elizabeth Thatcher stepped down, a sack of beans in her arms. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You need seed," she said. "I'll leave it by your fence if you take it. No one needs to know who gave it." The men turned to glare, but she held their gaze. Ella blinked. "Thank you." Elizabeth nodded once. "Not all of us forget what it means to owe your life to someone." The riders mounted up again. The second man muttered something as he turned his horse. Talon watched them go. Ella didn't flinch. She looked to the trees, then to her children. "If Dustben wants a line drawn," she said, "they better bring chalk." The sky blushed violet as the last warmth of day slipped below the hills. Smoke drifted low across the campfires, popped gently in their rings. A light wind stirred the teepees. Ella stood by the riverbank, arms crossed, watching her children sleep beneath a hanging blanket of stars. Lily murmured in her dreams. Noah sucked his thumb behind her. Talon approached without a sound. "They'll leave soon," he said. She didn't turn strong. "Elk?" He nodded. "He'll take the families north. Try to settle near Dustben Trade Grow." Be seen. Ella's gaze stayed fixed on the cradle. "And the others?" "Chief Two Feathers ride south, hidden land near the old hunting routes. Quiet life, less risk, less freedom." She turned to him. "I've lived hidden in grief, in silence. I don't want that for them." Talon stepped beside her, hands folded. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a round piece of carved wood. LW still etched faintly into the grain. "Luke gave me this before the twins were born," she said. "He said, when you can't see the path, carry something that remembers you." Talon watched her. "I carried it through fire, snow, burial, and I thought it was the only thing keeping me upright." She turned the token in her fingers, but maybe it was just keeping me from reaching for anything else. She placed it in Talon's hand. "I don't need it anymore." His fingers closed gently around it. He didn't speak then. After a long silence, he said, "I still offer it a place beside me. Not just for shelter, not for the children, for you." Ella met his eyes. "Even if I'm carrying a past you didn't make?" she asked. He stepped forward. "Then I'll help carry it." They stood in the stillness, breath and wind and firelight. Then gently Talon lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles just once. No vow, no question. Ella reached up and laid her forehead against his. "Then let's begin." The scout arrived at dusk, horse, lathered and streaked with blood, where the reins had rubbed raw. He didn't wait to be welcomed, just dismounted, breath fogging in bursts, and shouted names into the firelit circle. Talon ran to meet him. Others gathered quickly. Strong elk, rising fawn. A few of the younger warriors of fire flared up in the ring. Shadows sharpened. Ella pulled Lily to her chest and stepped back beneath the teepee flap. From a distance she couldn't catch every word, but she understood enough. Something had broken. When Talon returned, his face was hard. The cavalry hit 3 fingers. Band, he said, south of the ravine claimed it was retaliation burned. Their lodges took women and children. Ella's breath caught. Were they armed? No, they were planting. He knelt beside the fire hands, stretched out to the warmth. We can't stay, she sat across from him. What will they do? They'll split, he said. Strong ELK believes in planting near, dustbin visibility trade, dignity through presence. Others will follow. Chief 2 feathers south to the shadows. They say it's safer in you. She asked. Talon looked at her eyes steady. Where you go, I go. Her fingers trembled slightly. I won't raise them in hiding. She said, I want them to walk roads without shame to be seen. Then we stay. He said. She reached for a folded cloth and wrapped it slowly around Noah, whose breath came easy now, even in the cool. They'll talk, she said. Whites, natives, all of them. Talon stood and offered her his hand, then let them talk. It took 4 days to reach the edge of Dustbin. They followed the thawing river, the path muddy beneath hooves and boots, strong elk. LED the way with a half-dozen families' wagons, creaking with what little they could carry when they crested the final ridge. Ella stopped. Her cabin still stood weathered, leaning slightly but upright. The door hung crooked, one shutter had rotted off. But the frame held. She stepped across the threshold. Dust caked the floor. The hearth was cold and filled with ash. A rusted nail tin still sat on the windowsill where Luke had left it. She touched it with 2 fingers outside. Talon walked the perimeter, checking posts, testing beams. I want to fix it, she said aloud. He didn't answer. He just started gathering stones to shore up the porch. They worked side by side, hauling clearing, straightening the twins napped in the cradle, while smoke began rising again from the chimney. Neighbors saw some watch from behind, fences some turned away by April. The land had softened, grass crept up beside the porch steps. The cottonwoods behind the cabin swelled with new buds. Smoke curled from the stovepipe again, but this time it smelled of stew and sourdough instead of silence inside. Noah crawled across the floor. After a feather, Lily chased him loud and grinning. They shrieked when the cradle tipped sideways, then laughed until they fell in a heap. Ella watched from the hearth, wiping her hands on her apron outside. Talon worked on the fence sleeves, rolled boots caked in dirt. His hammer rhythm echoed through the valley, the sound of something not just repaired, but earned later as the sun slid down behind the ridge. Talon walked up the steps carrying a bucket of water. Ella stepped onto the porch, arms folded loosely as she watched him walk up the path. His gait was sure, his face flushed from the day's work. He set bucket of water down by the steps and looked at her. His expression easy. They're loud today, he said. Ella smiled faintly. They're safe. The wind stirred between them, soft and cool. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried into the dusk. He leaned in slowly. Ella met him halfway. Their kiss was quiet, not rushed, not uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that comes after too much survival, the kind that says finally when they parted, their foreheads rested together inside. Noah shouted something unintelligible. A second later, Lily knocked over the flour tin with a crash. Talon sighed. We better go be parents. Ella laughed softly. We already are. They went in together side by side. 10 years had passed and the land had grown around them. Cottonwoods shaded the rebuilt porch, a garden stretched behind the cabin, thick with corn, beans, and fat red tomatoes. A carved swing hung from the support beam where Talon once stood, hammering now worn smooth by years of laughter. Inside, voices rang through the house. Noah arguing about the fish he'd caught, Lily demanding a longer braid. The cradle that once sat frozen in a blizzard now rested near the hearth, polished and empty. Its wooden slats still strong. Ella never got rid of it. Noah now, 10 spoke Comanche and English in the same breath. His feet were quick, his eyes observant. The men in town called him sharp. The elders called him grounded. He called himself both. Lily was bold, always asking questions no one wanted to answer. She braided feathers into her hair and sang to the chickens. Some in dust Ben looked at her with narrowed eyes. She looked back unflinching that afternoon. Lily climbed into her mother's lap beside the fire. Mama, she asked, how did you meet Papa? Ella smiled. She brushed a loose curl from her daughter's cheek outside. Talon was mending a fence rail. Noah had cracked his whistle, drifted in through the open window. Ella reached for the old tin box beneath the mantel. She took out a disc of carved wood. LW. The letters almost faded. Now this, she said, placing it in Lily's hands, was made by your father Luke before you were born. He told me when you can't see the path, carry something that remembers you. Lily turned it over gently. Ella's voice softened after he died. I carried it through a storm that nearly took us all. Then someone found us, not because he had to, but because he chose to. She looked out the window at Talon, and from then on I stopped surviving. I started choosing. Lily's brow furrowed. Did Papa Talon know that? Ella nodded. He never needed the token, he remembered on his own. The screen door creaked. Talon stepped inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. Supper's on, he said. Lily ran out, clutching the token tight. Ella lingered. She stood in the quiet stillness of the cabin, her hand resting on the cradle's polished edge through the open window. The smell of earth and warm bread mingled with the evening air. Outside laughter echoed between fence rails and cottonwoods. Once all she'd known was loss. Now she lived surrounded by the proof of what had been salvaged, what had been chosen. She stepped out into the fading light. The cottonwoods stirred in the wind, their branches shifting like arms reaching skyward. Their leaves whispered against one another like pages turning in a story still being written. A story not born of rescue or luck, but of grace, grit, and love that endured long after the storm. And as the sun slipped low beyond the prairie, Ella Langley walked back into the warmth of her home with no need to carry a token anymore.